Hi, it's Rory from counsellingtutor.com.
And it's Bob Cooke from the Manchester Institute of Psychotherapy. Hello.
Hi to you all. And today we're going to unravel a thorny subject that has had psychology students and counselling students stumped for years. It's the story of Oedipus. And we're going to talk about one of Freud's ideas. And just before we start talking about it, I can remember many years ago talking to a student who, not on my course I hasten to add, but who'd done a psychology course at the college I worked at, who was really struggling with Oedipus. And what was really sad about it, Bob, was she completely dismissed the idea because she got it in her head that it was all about fancying your mother or being sexually attracted to your mother, and that was it. There was the beginning and the end. But it's a lot more subtle than that. And I think that we're going to try to explain that. So
yeah, well, let's start off with let's get this Oedipus story out of the way.
Right.
Tell me your version of it, how you see it.
Well, I think from reading the story of Oedipus, who was a figure in, as I understand it, in Greek mythology.
Greek mythology, yes.
He was a man who was separated from his parents early on, and then he went to make his way in the world, and he met a woman who was older than him.
That's right.
And he was attracted to her, and they had sexual relationships. And then he went to discover it was his mother, but he also killed his father, didn't
Correct,
he?
Yeah.
And then he didn't pull his own eyes out at the shame.
Right. You've got it. You're completely right.
Right. So whether Oedipus actually existed is another debate. However, it gives us a very, very good clue into how, as children, we make our minds up of who we're going to maybe have relationships with in later life as we're adults. And I'll start from this perspective. How many times have you heard little children, say to the parents, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry you"? You hear that?
Yeah.
So it's this idea that at some level there is some part of our parents, and with Oedipus it's about a son and a mother, isn't it? There's some part of the parent that we're attracted to, and we seek that out subconsciously in our partners.
Yeah, well, if you put it another way around, that if we talk about the son, or we talk about the mother or the father and the daughter, we're talking about the first love object.
Yes.
Aren't we, for the child?
Yes.
And therefore, in a way, the whole story of Oedipus is about setting boundaries. What's tabooed and what isn't taboo.
Yes.
And it's very much about the little boy or the little girl being able to separate out and knowing who they are and who the mother is and who they are and who the father is. And it's a Freudian idea, and he talked about the Oedipus conflict really coming about in that first 1.5 to 2.5 years, or 1.5 to 3.5 years area, where the infant is starting to learn to separate out.
Right.
What the French call the rapprochement period.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Where the child starts to learn who they are and who the other is.
Right.
Who they are and who their parents are. So it's a very grounding parable, if you like.
Yes. So the notion that children begin to see themselves as separate individuals and others as separate people as well. So if we take away the kind of popular notion of Oedipus being a man who was attracted to his mother and who had sexual relationships with his mother, how does it play out in our psychology? What kind of decisions do we make, maybe when we're choosing partners, that we may be unaware of, subconsciously unaware of?
Well, do you remember I just said that the opposite sex is the first love object.
Yes.
So if you think of that in terms of, well, think of it in terms of the erotic transference.
Yes.
It's really interesting, isn't it? In terms of how the erotic transference is often played out in the therapy room.
Yes.
With the opposite sex. Can you see any connections there?
Well, I mean, the erotic transference may be where the therapist is picking up signals from the client that they're subconsciously putting out. So they may not be doing it overtly. They may not be saying things like, I really do find you attractive, but it may be flirting, it may be a way of dressing, it may be a way of just being with the therapist, which gives the therapist the idea that maybe there's something else, a subtext to what's going on.
That's right. I think it's very important. In fact, we did a video on the erotic transference all about this, which is in the YouTube channel. So have you seen much of the Oedipus conflict being played out in your therapy room?
Well, I have. I'm going to give you some examples.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Maybe I won't give you an example of a client because I'm kind of thoughtful of confidentiality, but I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who I've not seen for a long time, but she had relationships with men, and there was always a pattern to the relationship. They were very controlling. They were very they got into a lot of criminal activity. And one day we were having a chat, and she was kind of bemoaning the fact that she'd got involved in these people, and she said, you know, that classic, I can't help myself. And I just asked her, I said, what was your father like? And it turned out her father exhibited a lot of the behaviours that her boyfriends did. In fact, they were slightly unreliable. They were slightly got involved. Let's say slightly. You either get involved in criminality or you don't. But he got involved in criminal activities. But what was most telling wasn't that particularly. It was the excitement that she had when she was with her father. This kind of heightened arousal, where she never quite knew what was going to be going on next with Dad. And then she just met men who did the same pattern of behaviour. And it was almost like she was addicted to the thrill of it, and just, it's like being on a roller coaster. She loved the intensity of it, but when it came to an end, she just kind of felt a bit lost and couldn't replicate it. Would that be the kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is loving and hating the love object.
Yes.
And how you work out that conflict.
Yes.
And of course, children have to work that out all the times with their mothers and fathers.
Yes.
How they can work out their boundaries, their earlier conflicts of love and hate, is part of the whole development of the infant, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of interesting when it all goes wrong for people, where they find themselves in abusive relationships. Again, you know, with attachment styles, that can be the same process being played out, can't it, Bob? Where they are associating with somebody who is doing the same things to them that maybe their parents did in terms of emotional connection. I'd see that in the therapy room a lot, I have to say.
Yeah, it's a very all these sort of issues are played out a lot, I think, and they're specifically played out a lot with the opposite sex.
Yes.
Therapists. Now, it's an interesting one because in many of the therapy books they talk about that the gender of the therapist doesn't matter, or may not matter, and actually I think it matters a lot.
I think you're right. I totally agree with you.
And in the assessment process, I will, with the client, and before I pass them on to the therapist, I'll say, do you want a female or a male? And sometimes they're very clear that they want a male or want a female. Majority of the time they say it doesn't matter, but as we go deeper into it, I think it needs more thought quite often than certainly the textbooks talk about.
Yes.
And at my institute, we have 15 or 16 therapists, and 12 of them are women. That leaves only 3 men.
Right. We're a minority.
But I think the very gender often triggers off these very early issues.
Yes.
And I don't think they should be underestimated.
No.
I remember my daughter, when she was, she was about 2.5, and she clambered. What happened was she clambered into bed with me, then, and my wife was there, and she started kicking me, and she said, "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." I can't remember the actual words, but basically, I need to just love my mummy. And personally, personal stuff. But in a way, how they work through that conflict of this whole process of who they can love, who they can't love, how much love is enough. It's a really interesting one.
It is, and I think as we finish on that note, that idea of love, that is the in terms of the Oedipus idea, it is about love, and it's about how we project our love and why we offer to love individuals. So I hope that's made Oedipus a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, and it's often about how we handle our murderous rage, I think. At the other sex.
Yes. Murderous rage.
Yeah. I mean, this is what Oedipus was about. He, father, killed the father and had sex with the mother. So it's the good and bad object. I've kept away from object relations on purpose in a way, because I've done another video on it.
Yes, we'll put the links in the bar.
Also, it's a pretty technical term, but we internalise the others in our psychological profile, and in a way they're always at battle with each other.
Yes.
We could see it that way anyway. And they, in psychological language, there's always the tension about the two objects and how we relate to those two objects.
Yes.
And hating them and loving them, and how we combine those two objects together to find psychological peace in ourselves.
Yes. So at some level, we're always carrying those significant others with us.
Yeah, and how we create that dynamic of how we deal with our murderous impulses to connect and disconnect and to annihilate and destroy, as well as to love and not to be over-consumed by that love.
Yes. So
does that all make sense?
It does, and I think Oedipus is one of those ideas that sometimes you have, if you're studying it just on an academic level, you just have to take it on face value, I think, a little bit. But in terms of therapeutic encounters, working with clients, it's very nuanced. It's not always apparent. Sometimes, in my experience, certainly working with clients, you just see it appear. Maybe in the dialogue, how people are talking, or maybe when they kind of slip and say, "Do you know, he reminds me of my father."
Yeah, and I want to destroy him.
And I want to destroy him.
Those psychological levels that we keep in the depths of our personality constructs.
So I hope that's made Oedipus a little more accessible.
or more complex.
Or more complex.
Whichever way you look at it.
But I think the trying to get over it wasn't just about a man who fancied his mother.
It's about how we handle the different parts of ourselves, the different impulses, the rage, the objects, you see, the other thing I just want to say on this.
Yes.
One of the major psychological purpose that has to be achieved between the age of 1 and, we'll say 4, but we could talk about, the length of the duration psychologically and developmentally, is object constancy. In other words, we need to develop the internalized constant others in our head, which are going to be able to guide us positively to determine who we are, instead of them having to be with us every moment of the day living, they're
Yes.
internalized here. And so as we internalize those objects, we need to also find some peace with them. And I think what Freud was struggling with and talking about is, how does the person, especially if there's been some problems in that search for object constancy, how do they find peace with themselves when they have these murderous feelings for the opposite love object and the opposite? And this is all about finding peace and compatibility in our psychological profile. So you're right, it's a deep subject, but I hope you found it useful.
Yes. So, on that note of murderous intent, I thank you for watching.
And thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.